Alright, Shalom. First and foremost, call Allah Yamla, Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Harakhakwadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone, from whom I learned the truth from, and also peace and salutations to the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. In this video, I'm going to be going into an article from, as you see here on the screen, this is from the People's Voice.tv. And you see the title of the article, it says, Canadian government to begin arresting citizens who post, quote, hateful content on social media. Alright. And as it goes into, it says, the Canadian government has announced plans to begin arresting citizens who post material on social media deemed, quote, offensive by the government. Alright. Then it goes into says down here Infowars.com reports. All right, Infowars, which is ran by Alex Jones. It says generally speaking, the law will apply equally online as it does in real communities, he said, adding, just in the limited circumstances where there is the willful promotion of hatred against someone. Alright, then I'm gonna go a little bit further down. It goes into as reported by LifeSite News. It says Bill C9 has been blasted by constitutional experts as allowing empowered police and the government to go after those it deems have violated a person's feelings in a hateful way. So just imagine you can get arrested for posting something that online, that hurts somebody's feelings. You post something online, okay, you may be about your beliefs on something, okay, or your opinion on something, and it just so happens to hurt somebody's feelings that may come across whatever it is that you post. It may hurt their feelings, it may offend them in some type of way, and they could basically have you reported to the authorities and have you arrested. Just imagine, being in a time like this. All right, and we know that times like this are upon us. Okay, as mind you, this is currently in the works up there in Canada. Okay, which we know Canada is a part of this beast system, is a part of NATO. All right. But guess what? Very soon, this is getting ready to happen here in the United States as well. All right. It says, let's see, I'm going to go down a little bit. All right. It says, I'm going to read down here. It says, John Carpe of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has blasted Bill C9 as something that would empower police and the government to go after those it deems have violated a person's feelings in a hateful way. And then it says underneath it says, also as reported by LifeSite News, conservative MP Leslyn Lewis called out the hypocrisy of Bill C9 for being silent regarding rising, quote unquote, Christian hate. Okay, so evidently there's a rise in so-called Christian hate going on up there in Canada as well. All right, and then it says Lewis has warned before that Bill C9 will open the door for authorities to prosecute Canadians' speech deemed hateful, possibly. All right, and then it even says underneath it, it says Carpe also lamented how the bill mentions, all right, rising, quote unquote, rising anti-Sim. All right, you see that word, but says nothing about the arson attacks on Catholic and Christian churches plaguing Canada. Okay, so as it went into the whole, not only can this particular bill be used to combat okay, so-called rise in Christian hate up there in Canada. But as we can see, it also can be used to come up against and arrest those that are pushing the whole so-called anti-sim, all right, talking points. Speaking out against the small caps, okay, the so-called JEWs, right? And I looked up, okay, Bill C9 on Google. It says Bill C9, also known as the Combating Hate Act, is a proposed Canadian law that would amend the criminal code to address hate motivated crime, intimidation, and display of hate symbols. It says key provisions including creating new offenses for intimidating or obstructing access to protected spaces, making hate motivated crimes a more distinct offense with harsher penalties, all right, and criminalizing the public display of certain hate and all right terrorism symbols. It says critics have raised concerns that the bill could infringe on freedoms of expressions and assembly. Okay, basically your First Amendment rights, right? It says while the government argues it's necessary to protect vulnerable communities. You see that? And guess what? And this is getting ready to happen here in Babylon the Great America. Okay, well, free speech, your First Amendment rights are getting ready to be taken away, all under the guise of combating hate speech and protecting the vulnerability of certain so-called communities, i.e., the small caps, the so-called JEWs, right? All under the guise of fighting anti-sim and hate speech and so-called racist speech and things like that. All right, these particular unrighteous decrees and laws are getting ready to be passed. All right, and again, this is in the works up there in Canada, but we also know, we the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, we also know that this ultimately is getting ready to come down to here in the States. Okay, Babylon the Great America. All right. And as a matter of fact, even recently, Trump even talked about how, he's pretty much getting ready to kill free speech. All right, in which when you look up that when Trump made that particular statement, when you look up certain videos of it on YouTube, okay, he pretty much made this statement of pretty much doing away with free speech or killing free speech, or roughly paraphrasing how he said it. He pretty much made that statement all under the guise of coming up against people that are burning flags and things like that. But we know, and that's how these devils operate. Okay, they use these particular situations and controversial acts and things like that people do to pass unrighteous decrees to justify, so-called, doing away with these acts and particular talking points and whatnot, because ultimately what they want to do is they want to use things like that, okay, these certain controversial events, all right, riots and protests and all these things, to ultimately eliminate truth speech, okay, because as I've been saying over the past couple weeks or so, one of the major threat to Esau's NWO agenda is not violence, it's not the sword. Okay, because ultimately the elites of Esau Edom, they're pushing for violence. Okay, they're pushing for civil unrest and civil war and social anarchy and all these things. They need violence to further push their NWO agenda. Okay, to create order out of chaos. But the number one threat against Esau's NWO agenda is free speech. And more importantly, truth speech. Okay, speech and online content and online talking points that speak out against Esau's NWO agenda and speak out against the small caps. All right, Amalek. Okay, and speak out against how the elites of Esau Edom want to pretty much, merge man with machine and merge man with technology. Okay. Via the Charagma, the MOTB, in which right now over there in the UK, We already see the government over there in the UK rolling out a digital ID system, okay, in which there's people protesting out there in the UK against the digital ID agenda. All right, but as of lately, you even had I believe either the president or the prime minister out there in the UK who pretty much announced that okay they're going to impose a 85 euro fine for anybody who doesn't have digital ID out there in the UK. Okay, and again, these are all unrighteous decrees. Okay, matter of fact, let's get it. Isaiah 10 and 1 real quick. Isaiah 10 verse 1, it says, woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that right grievousness which they have prescribed. Okay, verse 2, to turn aside the needy from judgment, and to take away the right from the poor of my people, that widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. And of course, not only do we know that these unrighteous decrees and these certain laws and legislations that's being passed by these different countries within this beast system, America, NATO, and the EU, not only are these things being passed to take away the rights of the Lord's people, the true Israelites, so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, but these unrighteous decrees and these certain bills and legislations are going to be used to take away the rights from, pretty much all the people. Okay, take away people's constitutional rights, their First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, their Fourth Amendment rights. All right, all of their so-called rights. You see, and so as this bill is going into, all right, Bill C9, that's in the works up there in Canada. It goes into says key provisions. Says intimidation and obstruction. It says creates new offenses to prohibit intentionally instilling fear or physically blocking access to places like places of worship, community centers, all right, so on and so forth. And I'll go down to right here under concerns. It says some civil society groups such as the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and Egal Canada have raised concerns that Bill C9 could lead to the criminalization of peaceful protests and infringe on charter protected freedoms of expression and assembly, aka your First Amendment rights here in the United States. Okay, so you have certain groups up there in Canada, as they're looking at this bill being in the works, they're basically concerned that this particular bill can take away people's rights to protest. Okay, take away their rights of expression and their rights of assembly. Basically their free speech rights. And it says critics argue the bill's provisions are overly broad and vague, potentially giving law enforcement and the government too much discretion. Okay, giving them the right, basically giving the right, giving the government and law enforcement the right to pretty much, dictate on their own, what's considered as free speech and hate speech and harmful speech and anti-Sem speech and anti-Christian speech and things like that. Okay, they're concerned that pretty much the government and the law enforcement will pretty much make up their own opinions on what's hate speech and anti-Sem speech and and this and the third. Okay, and these are all just more unrighteous decrees, as we just read up in Isaiah 10, and it's ultimately going to lead to draconian laws, draconian measures. Okay, a person could just simply be arrested and criminalized just for posting something that somebody gets offended over, or that can hurt somebody's feelings. Okay, and again, we know that, as I just read, this is happening up there in Canada right now, but we know very soon this is getting ready to come to the United States. All right, And we know ultimately as well, we the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, okay? And we know ultimately as well that this is all getting ready to, be set up to wage war against the prophets and the men of the Lord, starting with the apostles and the bishops and the elders of Great Millstone down to the least of us, okay? Those of us that, that preach this word throughout the four corners of the earth, preach the gospel of Yahweh Shemel Shai, out on the highways and the byways, preaching the word, doing these lessons, doing these videos, okay, to edify the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. We know these things set up by Esau, Edom in the left-hand side are ultimately going to be used to wage war against the elect, okay, the prophets and the men of the Lord, okay. Let's go here to Isaiah 29. Isaiah 29. Matter of fact, before I get Isaiah 29, let's get Jeremiah 49 and 10. All right, because all these these legislations and bills that's getting ready to be passed to crack down on free speech and what they deem as hate speech and offensive speech and online content and all these things. All right, ultimately, Esau, Edom, and his elites in the left-hand side are getting ready to pass all these particular laws and legislation because, all right, Esau is being made bare. Right, Esau is being exposed. All right, this inquisition is this inquisition from on high, from Yahweh Shemel Shai, is driving them crazy. Okay. And as it says right here in Jeremiah 49 and 10, it says, "But I have made Esau bare. I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself." You see that? Esau, Edom, starting with his elites, they can't hide themselves no more. Okay, meaning what? They can't hide their agenda and their intent anymore. Because, for years and generations, one of the main reasons why the elites of Esau, Edom, and and his top banking families have been able to go around the earth and wiggle around the earth, okay, and do their wickedness and topple governments and create, okay, so much, wickedness and rebellion against Yahweh Shema Shai throughout the four corners of the earth, is because they've for the longest have thrived off of secrecy, okay. Going unknown, going under the radar, okay, being able to hide themselves under different terms and names and whatnot, okay, the Illuminati and things like that. For centuries and generations, they've been able to go throughout the earth and do their wickedness and wage all these wars and start all these wars and okay, forward all this rebellion against Yahweh Shema Shai under secrecy, okay, being able to hide their identities and hide their agendas. But now, as we live in the age of technology, in the age of information, where anything that happens throughout the earth within minutes and hours can go viral all throughout the internet and all throughout social media, okay, well, guess what? Likewise with the wickedness and the agendas of Esau, Edom, and those that rub elbows with him, okay. All of Esau's wickedness is being exposed and being put at the forefront, okay, and the internet is a major part of doing that, okay. And ultimately, we know it's the will of Yahweh Shema Shai, all right, as well as the mouth of the prophets, okay, testifying against this devil Esau, Edom, and his elites in the NWO agenda, all right. But as we see in these outer days, as Scripture speaks about in Daniel 12, okay, knowledge will be increased, all right. As Scriptures also says in Joel, the 2nd chapter, that the Lord will pretty much put a spirit upon all flesh, okay, to to prophesy certain things, to speak on certain things happening throughout the earth, have certain visions, okay, for people to to use the internet and social media to make sense of certain things that Esau Edom is doing, all right, in his NWO agenda, all right. So is at a point in these latter days where Esau Edom, Okay, he's uncovered. He's made bare. He's exposed. All right, and and he's no longer able to hide himself. Okay, he can no longer hide under his secrecy anymore. All right, everything about Esau Edom is being all put out at the forefront. And so now, all right. Matter of fact, I continue to read the verse. It's the latter part of Jeremiah 49:10. It says, "His seed is spoiled, and his brethren, and his neighbors, and he is not." Yeah, Esau is being spoiled in a spiritual sense. Okay, he's being exposed. Okay, being caught out. Okay, it's a shameful spewing upon all his glory. All right, it's a shameful spewing upon Amalek's glory, the small tops. All right, and that's another major aspect of Esau being uncovered and not being able to hide himself. Okay, Amalek, what those small tops are doing over there in the land of Israel. Hey, why you think, as of recently, okay, you had pro-Israel billionaires recently buy out, okay, the U.S. branch of TikTok, okay, because over these recent months, all right, what's been happening over there in Gaza. Okay, a lot of people have been on TikTok over these months exposing what's been going on over there in Gaza, with all the bombings and the starvations, okay, the killings, the grape robbery and murder, all right? So Amalek is even being exposed, okay, the top tribe of Esau Edom. And so that's why we're at a point where Esau Edom is, getting ready to pass particular laws, okay, in this case up there in Canada, to to persecute and pretty much arrest and criminalize, okay, people who go online and go on social media posting, all right, quote unquote hateful content, okay, posting quote unquote, hate speech and misinformation and things like that, which to the devil, Esau Edom, what would the devil consider hate speech or misinformation? All right, truth speech, okay. Truth is considered hate speech and misinformation to the devil, Esau Edom. All right? And that's why, let's go to Isaiah 29. Isaiah 29, verse 20, it says, "For the terrible one is brought to naught, and the scorner is consumed, and all that watch for iniquity are cut off." All right? And let's read this in the AMP Bible, the AMP Bible. Isaiah 29 verse 20 in the AMP Bible, it says, "For the tyrant will come to an end, and the scorner will be finished. Indeed, all who are intent on doing evil will be cut off." And that's ultimately gonna happen when Yahushua comes back. All right, Yahushua is gonna cut off, all right, the workers of iniquity, the elites of Esau, Edom, and the NWO agenda. All right. But as I said, for the tyrant will come to an end. You see that? And that's the main reason why you have people all throughout the internet and all throughout social media, okay, speaking out against, okay, the wickedness of this beast system, right? The wickedness of America and NATO and their EU allies and so on and so forth, because people are tired of the tyranny. Okay, they're tired of catching hell financially and socially, and they're tired of their governors and their leaders getting on TV and getting before them and lying to them, making all these broken promises to them, okay, merging them closer and closer to all the AI and pseudoscience technology that's rising up in society, okay. People are tired of, their rights being threatened. Okay, their rights of just simply being a human being being threatened. Okay, they're tired of having to deal with all this technology that's taken away from the simplicity of everyday life. All right, pretty much the whole earth, okay, is tired of Esau Edom, basically. Esau's tyranny, his sword, his pseudoscience, and his technology. Okay, they're tired of all this AI. They're tired of, just everything. They're tired of all the affliction and the hell that comes with being ruled over by Esau and his wicked beast system. Okay, and so as you have more and more people within this whole entire setup, Okay, cursing out Esau, Edom, the terrible one. All right, for all of his tyranny and his you know, his wickedness and rebellion, and as the scripture says, yeah, the continual stroke that Esau is putting upon these people. Okay, as more and more people are speaking out against his, Esau and his NWO agenda, it says, verse 21, Isaiah 29, verse 21, that make a man an offender for a word, and lay a snare for him that reproveth in a gate, and turn aside the just for a thing of naught. Yeah, Esau is getting ready to make a man an offender for a word. Okay, in this case, up there in Canada, they're getting ready to make a man an offender, okay, for posting content online and on social media deemed that's going to be deemed as hate speech, as well as anti-Sim and anti-Christian speech, right? Which this whole entire system, America, NATO, and the EU, was never really and truly founded off of biblical values. Okay, these Edomites, he love to just throw out this whole Christian narrative and using Jesus Christ, but really, okay, the only time the Edomite ever uses Jesus Christ and uses the Bible is to justify waging war and justify doing wickedness. Okay, and now we see, okay, the whole Christian narrative is also going to be used to justify, okay, waging war against those that are speaking particular truths. You see that? And ultimately, we know these things are going to be used to wage war against the men of the Lord. Okay, us, the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel. All right, because again, going down into this article, let's see. Hold up. Let's see. Actually, yeah, right here, under B9 on Google. Okay, I'm gonna read this part again. Under concerns, it says some civil society groups, such as the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and Gov't Canada, have raised concerns that Bill C9 could lead to the criminalization of peaceful protests and infringe on charter protected freedoms of expression and assembly. And you see, when we go out to the highways and the byways and preach the word, and do our camp speakings, under this Edomite system, basically what we do on the highways and the byways is considered a protest and an assembly. You see that? So this bill would also be used to pretty much be used to demonize the camp speakings. Going out on the highways and the byways, doing live camps, preaching the scriptures, right? So this bill can also be used to target the camp speakings. You see that? Make us an offender for a word, okay, for the word of Yahweh Bashim Shai. All because what? This word is bringing Esau, Edom, the terrible one, down to naught. Okay, it's casting him down, is exposing Esau, Edom, making them bare. You see, and just like in real life, right? When you catch somebody with their pants with their pants down, so to speak, right? You catch somebody exposed, in their so-called nakedness, so to speak, right? It pretty much it casts down their image inside of your mind. It's like you're looking at them in a lower state. Okay, you see somebody exposed, you see somebody caught lacking, so to speak, right? You see somebody with their pants down, so to speak, right? Seeing a person in an exposed state, them being caught out, exposed, cursed out, whatever it may be, okay, it pretty much casts down their image inside of your head. You begin to look at them in a lower state. You begin to look down upon them narrowly, right? And that's how this whole world, okay, especially us, the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, are looking at Esau Edom as we get closer and closer to the end of Esau's rulership. All right, and the more and more Esau is being cut out and exposed and cursed out. Okay, he's being brought down to naught. He's being cast down by the word of Yahweh Shema Shai. All right. Matter of fact, I'll read it again. Isaiah 29 verse 20. For the terrible one is brought to naught, and the scorner is consumed. Okay. And how is Esau Edom being consumed? By this word going out. Okay. By the spirit of the Lord's mouth, as it speaks of in 2 Thessalonians 2. All right. Esau is being consumed by this inquisition that's being made against him. Is being consumed by prophecy coming to pass. Is being consumed by the word of the word of the Lord by the mouth of his prophets. Okay, and Esau is getting ready to do everything that he can to take this word off of social media, take this word off the internet, right? And we know that things like this is ultimately going to bring forth the famine of the word. Okay, where these videos are no longer going to be on the internet. Okay, the camp speakers are going to come to a halt. And right now, Esau Edom is already, taking certain brothers' pages down already. Okay, under the guise of spam and, fraudulent activity and, things like that. Esau's going to make up reasons to bring forth the famine of the word. Okay, all because he's being caught and exposed, right? And let's get this. Let's go to 2nd Ezra, it's the 6th chapter. All right, 2nd Ezra 6, as Esau's the end of the world. Okay, what's one of the main things in this chapter that's associated with the end of Esau's world? It says 2nd Ezra 6 verse 24. It says at that time shall friends fight one against another like enemies, and that's ultimately speaking of civil war, civil unrest. Okay, which is steadily brewing up here in Babylon Great America, as you have this whole continuing psyop between this whole left wing, right wing, Democrat versus Republican theater that's pretty much ravished all across America. Okay, people still divided up over this whole left, right, Democratic, Republican nonsense. All right. Is all going to lead to civil war, civil unrest. Okay, says again, 2nd Ezra 6 verse 24. At that time shall friends fight one against another like enemies, and the earth shall stand in fear with those that dwell therein. It says the springs of the fountains shall stand still, and in 3 hours they shall not run. Okay, and the springs of the fountains is talking about this word, this truth. Okay, these rivers of living water, all right, shall stand still, and in 3 hours they shall not run. Meaning what? There's going to come a time where this word is not going to go out. Okay, these videos won't be going out. Brothers' pages are going to be taken down. Okay, the camp speakers are going to come to a halt, right? And it's going to be especially because of legislation and unrighteous decrees such as this right here. And once again, even though this is in the works up there in Canada, but very soon this is getting ready to come to the United States. Babylon the Great. Okay, the famine of the word. All right, being criminalized and being made an offender for a word, for certain things you may post on social media and post online and post on YouTube. Okay, hey, this is where we at. Okay, this is where we're at in prophecy. All right, and this is all ultimately going to lead to the famine of the word. All right, Amos 8 and verse 11, it says, behold, the days come, saith the Lord Yahweh, that I will send a famine in the land. All right, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the word of the Lord Yahweh Shema Shai. Okay, and simultaneously, as we're getting ready to approach the famine of the word, we also know as well in prophecy that there's going to be an actual famine as well, an actual famine of bread and food, and a famine of water. Okay, a famine of resources, essential goods. Okay, so there's going to be Okay, a famine on all levels, a famine of the word, as well as a famine of food and water and resources. It says, verse 12, and they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord Yahweh Shemashai, and shall not find it. Yeah, and that's talking about those of our people, okay, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. This is talking about the 2/3 of our people that's going to be without the word when these times come. Okay, when the famine of the word is going to hit, when these videos are no longer going to be on the internet and on YouTube, and the pages are going to be taken down, and the camp speakings is going to come to a halt. Hey, that's when the 2/3 of our people are going to be going to and fro throughout the earth. Okay, from sea to sea, from north to the east. Okay, to seek the word of the Lord. All right, and mind you, this is talking about figuratively. Okay, 2/3 of our people are going to be going from sea to sea, and from north, south, east, and west via the internet. Okay, to seek the word of the Lord. Okay, because with the internet, you can look up videos and information all throughout the earth. Okay, all throughout the four corners of the earth. And that's what the 2/3 of our people are going to be doing when they're no longer going to be seeing the videos going out. They're going to be searching to and fro throughout the internet, okay, throughout the YouTube, social media, TikTok, you name it, okay, to seek the men of the Lord preaching the word. But as it said at the latter part of verse 12, they shall not find it. Okay, it says verse 13, in that day shall the fair virgins and young men faint for thirst. Yeah, the 2/3 of our people, they're gonna faint for thirst spiritually for these rivers of living water. Okay, but as it said in 2 Ezra 6:24, again, at that time shall friends fight one against another like enemies, and the earth shall stand in fear with those that dwell therein. The springs of the fountain shall stand still, and in 3 hours they shall not run. Okay, so hey, 2/3 of our people, very soon they're getting ready to to be without these rivers of living water. They're gonna fail for thirst of the word. You see that? Because what? 2/3 of our people are gonna try to seek the Lord they're gonna try to seek the Lord when it's too late. Okay? But the scripture says in Amos 55, not Amos, Isaiah 55:6, seek the Lord Yahweh Baal Shema Shai while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near. You see that? Because very soon the word of Yahweh Baal Shema Shai is not going to be found no more. Alright? The famine of the word is getting ready to hit. Edom is getting ready to come down with a sword and with great wrath on those that are preaching what he deems as hate speech and anti-Sem speech and misinformation. Okay, and as I said, call ye upon him while he is near. You jakes out there, you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, hey, seek the Lord while he may be found through seeking his prophets and his men, starting with the apostles and the bishops and the elders of Great Millstone, down to the least of us, that are of the hopeful elect, preaching his word in sincerity and truth, in the name of Yahweh Bashim Shai. Hey, get this word while it's still available, and seek the Lord while the doors of mercy are still open, all right, because very soon, you best believe when the famine of the word hits, hey, all bets are off, as they say in the world, that's when these prophecies and tribulation and persecution and the famine and all these things and civil unrest, they're going to speed up and intensify. Those of our people that's going to be without the word in that day, they're not going to be they're not going to be covered, nor are they going to be stable, because as the scripture says in Isaiah 33:6, showing you how this word is going to be a benefit for us, the hopeful elect, in that day. It says, Isaiah 33:6, and wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and the strength of thy salvation. You see that? And we, the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, how do we gain the wisdom and knowledge of Yahweh Bashim Shai? By, his word. Taking heed to his word. Listening to the men of the Lord, learning the scriptures, getting into the scriptures, as well as prophesying the word, this word that we have, this truth is one of the major things that's going to keep us stable in these times and be the strength of our salvation. But you see, 2/3 of our people, they don't have the wisdom and the knowledge of Yahweh Shema Shah. So therefore what? They're not going to be stable, okay, when they're not going to know when their next meal is going to come. They're not going to be stable when they're not going to know where to find water at, okay, for their thirst. They're not going to be stable when a perplexity hits, all right, when they're going to be without resources, okay, and they're not going to have the strength to endure, okay, until the Lord comes back to bring salvation to the elect. It says, the fear of the Lord Yahweh Shema Shai is his treasure. See that? So, hey, this is where we're at in prophecy. Okay, Esau is coming down, cracking down on free speech, First Amendment rights. Okay, the rights of protesting and assembly and things like that. And mind you, as of recently, okay, as we had the No Kings protest, I believe last weekend. Okay, you pretty much had Trump and the the right wingers, the Republicans and whatnot, pretty much labeled the No Kings protesters as Antifa. And we know that Antifa as of lately it has been used as a buzzword for terrorism. You see that? So pretty much speaking out against the system and speaking out against Esau's NWO agenda and his pseudoscience and his technology, all right, and everything Esau's trying to set up in the earthlings outer days is all going to lead to, okay, people being labeled as terrorists, Antifa, okay, being labeled as anti-Sim and things like that, so on and so forth. And we know this is all ultimately going to be, used to wage war against us, the hopeful elect, okay, who go into the scriptures and preach the gospel and take a hardcore stance against Esau, Edom, and his whole entire beast system and his image and against his mark and his NWO agenda. See that? So hey, the 2/3 of our people, hey, you jakes out there, man, hey, seek the Lord while he may be found. Because very soon, looking at articles like this, very soon the men of the Lord, okay, and the word of the Lord are no longer going to be found. All right. So so with that, Lord willing, this video is edifying, and until next time, shalom.